On the afternoon of January 22, 1979, en rue Verdun in the bustling heart of West Beirut, a woman of English appearance stood on her balcony, tending to a pot of geraniums. To the casual observer in the street below, she was Penelope, a slightly eccentric artist and charity worker in her early 30s, known for her solitary habits and her affection for stray cats. She had lived in the apartment for nearly a year, becoming a familiar, unremarkable feature of the neighborhood's complex social tapestry. But Penelope was a construct, a meticulously crafted identity known in the clandestine world as a legend. The woman herself was an operative of the Mossad, the Israeli Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations, and the geraniums were not her primary concern. Her gaze, shielded by sunglasses, was fixed on the intersection below, a point she had studied with the dispassionate intensity of a surveyor for 11 months. She was the final, human component of a sophisticated trap, the culmination of years of failure, frustration, and a burning, institutional desire for retribution. Her target was Ali Hassan Salameh, the charismatic and elusive chief of operations for the Palestine Liberation Organization's intelligence wing and the alleged architect of the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. At that moment, she was not just an artist, she was the patient, living trigger for an operation that aimed to close one of the bloodiest chapters in the history of the Shadow War. The problem of Ali Hassan Salameh had vexed the highest echelons of Israeli intelligence for nearly 7 years. He was not merely a terrorist commander, he was a figure of immense strategic importance, a man who moved with practiced ease between the violent underworld of Palestinian militancy and the refined salons of Beirut's high society. Codenamed the Red Prince for his affluent upbringing and revolutionary zeal, Salameh was the head of Force 17, the elite Praetorian Guard for PLO chairman Yasser Arafat, and the de facto director of Black September, the clandestine group responsible for the Munich attack. His operational significance was matched only by his elusiveness. Previous attempts to eliminate him as part of Operation Wrath of God had ended in catastrophic failure, most notably the 1973 Lillehammer affair in Norway, where Mossad assassins mistakenly killed an innocent Moroccan waiter, leading to the arrest of several operatives and a humiliating international scandal. These failures stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding of the target. Early attempts relied on brute force and speed, attempting to strike opportunistically. But Salameh was a master of tradecraft, a man who never slept in the same bed 2 nights in a row, who changed his vehicles constantly, and who surrounded himself with a phalanx of loyal, hypervigilant bodyguards. More critically, he had cultivated a secret backchannel with the Central Intelligence Agency, serving as a key liaison in the chaotic environment of Lebanon's civil war. This relationship, while controversial and clandestine, afforded him a layer of perceived immunity, complicating any direct action that might have unforeseen diplomatic repercussions with the United States. The conventional methods of assassination, the sniper's bullet, the hastily planted car bomb, the direct commando assault, were not merely difficult, they had proven to be impossible and counterproductive, only serving to heighten his paranoia and refine his security protocols. A new doctrine was required, one that shifted the operational paradigm from a swift, kinetic strike to a slow, methodical, intelligence-led penetration of his environment. To devise this new doctrine, Mossad Caesarea Department, responsible for special operations, first had to construct a psychological and operational profile of Salameh that was more detailed than any dossier previously compiled. He was a man of profound contradictions. Born to a family of Palestinian nationalist nobility, he was educated at the German mission school in Beirut and was fluent in multiple languages. He possessed a film star charisma, was impeccably dressed, and drove sports cars through the war-torn streets of Beirut with a reckless confidence that bordered on arrogance. In 1978, he married Georgina Rizek, a former Miss Universe, cementing his status as a celebrity within the Levantine world. This public persona, however, masked a deeply cunning and ruthless operational mind. He understood that predictability was death. His daily schedule was a deliberately chaotic symphony of last-minute changes. He would leave his apartment for one of several offices, only to divert to a safe house or a cafe meeting at a moment's notice. His convoy consisted of at least 2, sometimes 3, identical vehicles, typically Chevrolet sedans or Land Rovers, and he would switch between them unpredictably. His bodyguards were not simple thugs, they were Force 17 veterans, trained in counter-surveillance and evasive driving. They were instructed to watch for anything out of place, a parked car that had not been there the day before, a window left open that was usually closed, a street vendor whose face was unfamiliar. His environment, West Beirut, was a labyrinth of narrow streets, shifting alliances, and a population deeply sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, making it a non-permissive environment for any foreign intelligence service. The challenge, therefore, was not simply to locate Salome, but to predict his location at a specific time and place with a degree of certainty high enough to justify the immense risk of deploying a complex assassination mechanism. The audacious solution, born from months of debate and analysis within Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, was to invert the previous operational model. Instead of sending a team to hunt a moving target, they would fix a point in space and time and engineer a situation where the target would willingly deliver himself to it. The core of this new plan was not a piece of technology but a person, a deep-cover operative who could be inserted into Salome's world months in advance. This operative would not be a hunter but an anchor, a static observation post that could blend into the background so completely as to become invisible. The chosen vector for this penetration was a female operative, based on a psychological assessment that Salome, despite his operational discipline, possessed a degree of chauvinistic vanity. He would be less likely to perceive a solitary Western woman as a threat. The plan was high-risk and resource-intensive, demanding an operative with a rare combination of linguistic skill, psychological fortitude, and an almost inhuman level of patience. The primary obstacle was the creation of a cover identity, legend, that could withstand the intense, passive scrutiny of a paranoid environment. Any flaw, a mispronounced Arabic phrase, a gap in her fabricated history, a moment of unguarded anxiety, could lead to her exposure, capture, and almost certain torture and execution. Furthermore, the operation required a level of interdepartmental coordination rarely seen. It would involve not just Caesarea but also the technical division for the creation of the assassination device, the recruitment division for selecting the perfect operative, and the logistics branch for her insertion and eventual extraction. The consequence of failure was not just the loss of an agent but a potential repeat of the Lillehammer disaster on a grander scale, a diplomatic firestorm that could destabilize the fragile politics of the Middle East. The technological centerpiece of the operation was as meticulously planned as the human element. The weapon was to be a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, but one engineered with a level of precision far beyond the crude bombs common in Beirut. Mossad's technical specialists began with the choice of vehicle, a Volkswagen Beetle. It was selected for its ubiquity in the city, ensuring it would not attract undue attention. A specific, used Beetle was acquired in Europe by a front company and transported to a secure workshop. There, it was systematically disassembled and rebuilt around the explosive payload. The engineers determined that the most effective way to guarantee the kill was to place the explosives within the chassis of the car itself, specifically packed into the door panels and under the seats on the side that would face Salome's vehicle. The explosive was approximately 100 kilograms of composition C4, chosen for its stability and high brisance. It was not simply packed in bulk, it was molded into shaped charges, designed using the Misnay-Chardin effect to direct the blast wave and fragmentation laterally, into the kill zone, rather than vertically or rearward. This was intended to maximize the destructive force on the target vehicle while minimizing collateral damage to surrounding buildings and civilians, a key ethical and practical consideration. The shrapnel consisted of thousands of small steel ball bearings, which would not only be lethal but would also provide a unique forensic signature for post-blast analysis to confirm the effectiveness of the device. The detonation system was the most complex component. It relied on a sophisticated, multi-channel radio receiver, designed to be triggered by a coded signal from a handheld transmitter. To overcome potential electronic jamming by Salome's security detail or the chaotic radio frequency environment of Beirut, the system used a frequency-hopping spread spectrum technology, cycling through a pre-programmed sequence of frequencies hundreds of times per second. The transmitter, small enough to be concealed within a purse or a book, had a range of several hundred meters, but its signal was designed to be highly directional, requiring a clear line of sight to the receiver embedded in the car. This technical requirement directly dictated the operational plan. The operative triggering the device had to have a visual on both the target's convoy and the explosive-laden vehicle simultaneously. The selection of the operative for this critical role was an exhaustive process. The profile called for a woman, preferably a European national by birth, to ensure the authenticity of her passport and background. She needed to be fluent in English and French, the languages of Beirut's educated class, and possess at least a functional knowledge of Arabic. She required a formidable psychological resilience, the capacity to live a life of total isolation and deception for an extended period without succumbing to stress or making a critical error. The candidate who emerged was a British-born citizen in her late 20s, whose identity remains one of the most protected secrets in Israeli intelligence. For the purpose of the operation, she was given the codename Erica Chambers. Although the legend she would live was that of Penelope, her motivations were reportedly rooted in a deep ideological conviction, possibly stemming from a personal connection to victims of terrorism. Before her recruitment, she had been leading an ordinary life, which made her an ideal candidate for a clean cover. Her training was brutal and comprehensive. She spent months at a Mossad training facility, where she was drilled in the arts of surveillance and counter-surveillance, learning to detect if she was being followed by spotting the same face in different locations, by using reflections in shop windows, or by employing simple maneuvers like suddenly stopping to tie a shoelace. She was taught methods of secure communication, including the use of dead drops, microphotography, and coded language in seemingly innocuous international phone calls. A significant portion of her training focused on psychological conditioning. She underwent stress inoculation exercises, where she was placed in simulated high-pressure scenarios, interrogations, compromised meetings, sudden emergencies, to train her to control her physiological responses, such as heart rate and perspiration. She rehearsed her cover identity until it was second nature, memorizing every detail of a fictional childhood, education, and family life in England. This conditioning was designed to build a mental fortress, allowing her to compartmentalize her true identity from the persona she would inhabit, a psychological schism necessary for long-term survival in deep cover. The construction of the Penelope legend was a masterpiece of clandestine artifice. It began with the procurement of a genuine British passport, obtained through a third country to be untraceable back to Israel. Mossad's documents division then expertly aged and modified it, adding entry and exit stamps from various European and Asian countries to create a plausible travel history for an adventurous young artist. A complete financial backstory was established. Bank accounts were opened in her name in London and Geneva, with a steady flow of small deposits from a trust fund set up by a shell corporation, simulating a modest inheritance. This provided her with a legitimate source of income in Beirut, allowing her to rent an apartment and live comfortably without raising questions about her finances. The persona of an artist was chosen deliberately. It provided a perfect justification for her solitary lifestyle, her odd hours, and her tendency to sit for long periods, seemingly sketching, which provided a natural cover for her surveillance activities. To bolster this identity, she was supplied with high-quality art supplies purchased from specific, well-known art shops in London. She was even given a portfolio of her own mediocre paintings, enough to be convincing should anyone visit her apartment. The most ingenious detail of her cover was her work with a Palestinian charity organization that ran a clinic for refugees in the Sabra and Shatila camps. This not only gave her a legitimate reason for being in Beirut but also placed her within the Palestinian social ecosystem, allowing her to hear gossip and gather low-level intelligence. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that made her seem sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, the ultimate camouflage. Finally, her handler recommended she adopt stray cats. The animals served multiple purposes. They reinforced her image as a gentle, slightly eccentric woman, they provided her with companionship during the long months of isolation, and, most practically, their comings and goings gave her a recurring, natural excuse to be on her balcony or near her window at all hours of the day and night. In the late spring of 1978, Penelope arrived in Beirut. Her insertion was deliberately low-key. She flew in on a commercial flight from Cyprus, passed through immigration with her authentic British passport, and took a taxi to a pre-scouted hotel. For the first few weeks, she behaved exactly as a newcomer would, exploring the city, visiting museums, and making inquiries about apartments. Her true mission began with the search for the ideal observation post. Guided by intelligence from other Mossad assets on the ground who had been tracking Salameh's general movements, she focused on the affluent neighborhood of Verdun. She identified an apartment building on Rue Verdun that offered a clear, unobstructed view of an intersection that Salameh's convoy frequently passed through on his way from his wife's apartment to his mother's residence or to one of his command centers. Posing as a writer seeking a quiet place to work, she secured a lease on a sixth-floor apartment. The flat became her sanctuary and her sniper's nest. She furnished it sparsely, turning the main room into an art studio. The balcony, which overlooked the crucial intersection, became her primary post. For months, her life fell into a monotonous, disciplined rhythm. Each morning, she would set up her easel on the balcony and sketch or paint. But her eyes were constantly scanning the street below. She kept a detailed log, concealed within her sketchbooks using a coded notation system. She recorded the make, model, and license plate of every car that passed, the schedules of local shopkeepers, the patrol patterns of the Lebanese police, and, most importantly, every appearance of Salameh's convoy. She learned to distinguish his vehicles from the dozens of other similar cars used by PLO officials. She noted his timing, the composition of his security detail, and the subtle changes in his routes. Her communication with her handler was sparse and meticulously planned. Meetings were never face-to-face. She would leave signals, such as a specific flower pot arranged in a particular way on her balcony, to indicate that she had information. The information itself would be passed via a dead drop, perhaps a package of microfilm concealed in a hollowed-out stone left in a public park. The psychological strain was immense. She lived in a state of constant, low-level paranoia, knowing that a single mistake could unravel everything. The friendships she made with neighbors or fellow charity workers were tools, relationships managed with a clinical detachment that required a profound and draining act of will. As the autumn of 1978 bled into winter, a clear pattern began to emerge from the terabytes of observational data she had painstakingly collected. While Salameh's day-to-day movements remained erratic, there was a high statistical probability that he would travel along Rue Verdun in the mid-afternoon on any given day, particularly after visiting his wife, Georgina Rizik, who lived nearby. He favored a specific route that took him through the intersection directly below Penelope's balcony. This was the predictive intelligence the Mossad had been waiting for. The operation was greenlit for its final phase. A new team of Mossad operatives began to infiltrate Beirut, each with a specific role. One, posing as a German businessman, drove the prepared Volkswagen Beetle from a port in Lebanon to a rented garage in East Beirut. Another operative, a technical specialist, arrived to make the final preparations on the device, checking the circuitry and arming the detonator. A third team was responsible for surveillance and support, ready to create a diversion or assist with the extraction if necessary. The plan was set for January. The Volkswagen would be parked on Rue Verdun in a spot that Penelope had identified as being consistently available. It would be positioned at a slight angle to the curb, calculated to direct the main force of the blast directly into the passenger side of a passing vehicle. Penelope's role was now singular and critical. She was to provide the final, positive identification of the target and give the signal to the operative with the detonator, who would be positioned nearby. In the final days, the tension became almost unbearable. Penelope had to maintain her normal routine, painting, feeding her cats, and greeting her neighbors, all while knowing that she was at the nexus of a deadly, imminent event. On the morning of January 22, the Volkswagen Beetle was driven into position. The operative who parked it calmly walked away and disappeared into the city's crowds. All assets were in place. The trap was set. All that was left was for the target to appear. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon on January 22, 1979, Penelope was on her balcony. The street below was filled with the normal afternoon traffic and pedestrian flow. She had been there for hours, her stomach a tight knot of controlled adrenaline. She saw the familiar two-car convoy of Chevrolet sedans turn onto Rue Verdun, moving at a steady pace. From her vantage point, she could see inside the lead vehicle. In the passenger seat was Ali Hassan Salameh. There was no doubt. After months of studying his photograph, his posture, his mannerisms, she recognized him instantly. He was laughing, talking to his driver. It was the moment of absolute certainty the entire operation had been built to achieve. She calmly reached down and picked up a small, red handbag she had placed by her feet. It was a prearranged signal. She held it up for a few seconds, as if checking its contents, then placed it on the balcony railing. This was the signal to the trigger man, another Mossad operative stationed in a car down the street with a direct line of sight to both her balcony and the intersection. He saw the handbag. He armed the transmitter. As Salameh's Chevrolet drew level with the parked Volkswagen Beetle, entering the precisely calculated kill zone, the trigger man pressed the button. The detonation was instantaneous and overwhelming. A deafening roar echoed through the neighborhood, followed by a brilliant flash of orange-white light. The force of the 100 kilograms of C4 atomized the Volkswagen and ripped the side off Salameh's sedan, lifting it into the air and slamming it against a parked car. The shaped charges performed exactly as designed, focusing a hurricane of metal and superheated gas directly into the passenger compartment. Ali Hassan Salameh and his 4 bodyguards were killed instantly. The second car in the convoy was damaged, and a wave of shrapnel sprayed across the street, killing 4 innocent bystanders and injuring 18 others. For a moment, a stunned silence hung over the street, broken only by the sound of falling debris and the first, distant wail of sirens. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion, while chaos erupted on the street below, Penelope did not panic. Her training took over, and she moved with a cold, procedural calm. She stepped back from the balcony, took one last look at the devastation her signal had wrought, and turned away. Her mission was complete. Her extraction plan, rehearsed mentally hundreds of times, was now in motion. She walked to her bedroom, where a small suitcase had been packed for weeks. It contained a change of clothes, a different wig, and a new set of identity documents, a Canadian passport under a different name. She left everything else behind, the art supplies, the clothes, the paintings, the life of Penelope. She walked down the back stairs of the apartment building, avoiding the main entrance, and exited into a rear alley. She did not run. She walked at a normal pace, melting into the growing crowds of panicked and curious onlookers. She made her way to a prearranged rendezvous point several blocks away, where a car was waiting. Within hours, she and the other members of the hit team were smuggled out of Lebanon, most likely by sea from a secluded stretch of coastline north of Beirut, picked up by an Israeli naval vessel. The identity of Penelope, the eccentric English artist, vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only a furnished apartment and a few confused neighbors who wondered what had happened to the quiet woman who loved cats. The consequences of the operation were immediate and profound. For the Palestine Liberation Organization, the death of Ali Hassan Salameh was a devastating blow. They had lost not only their most effective intelligence chief and special operations commander but also a key political operative and a potential successor to Yasser Arafat. His assassination sent a shockwave of fear and paranoia through the PLO leadership, forcing them to divert significant resources to internal security and mole hunting, thereby disrupting their operational tempo. The investigation into the bombing by the PLO was fruitless. The device was too sophisticated, the perpetrators too professional. They were left with no forensic trail, only the chilling realization that the Mossad could penetrate their inner sanctum and strike at will. For Israel, the operation was a resounding success, a cathartic and symbolic closing of the circle that began in Munich. It restored the Mossad's reputation for lethality and reach after the Lillehammer debacle and served as a stark warning to its enemies. Strategically, it demonstrated the effectiveness of the new doctrine of patient, intelligence-led assassination over brute force attacks. The long-term investment in human intelligence and meticulous planning had paid off, setting a new standard for future operations. Diplomatically, the fallout was contained. The CIA, while angered by the loss of a valuable and secret asset, could not publicly acknowledge their relationship with Salome. Their private protests to the Israeli government were noted but ultimately did little to change the strategic reality. For the operative known as Erica Chambers, the psychological cost remains unknown. She had inhabited a false life with total commitment, building relationships and a daily existence, only to serve as the instrument of its violent disruption. To live with such a profound duality, the gentle artist on one hand, the clinical killer on the other, requires a degree of compartmentalization that can leave deep, invisible scars. She had succeeded in her mission, but in doing so, had to extinguish not only the life of her target but also the life of the person she had pretended to be for a year, a ghost identity that existed solely to facilitate a single moment of calculated violence. The operation raised enduring ethical questions about the nature of targeted killings, the use of deep cover deception, and the calculus of collateral damage, questions that continue to resonate in the shadowy world of intelligence and counterterrorism. What is the true moral cost of living a complete lie, even in the service of what one believes to be a just cause? Can an act of retributive justice, meticulously planned and clinically executed, ever be truly separated from the raw, indiscriminate violence of terrorism it seeks to answer? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.